Hong Kong is definitely in crisis. The optimism on July 1st, 1997, mixed with a little bit uncertainty, had now been, shall I say, replaced and displaced by a prevalent and popular mood of uncertainty. The so-called one country, two system that allow Hong Kong to enjoy many of its own system procedural values under the PRC sovereignty, one country, is being called into question. Some would call it 1.5 system, and some said no, it's now down to 1.25. So we are very fortunate to make use of a gift from Hong Kong because we didn't pay for their trip, nor we could dare to take up their time too much. One, the first speaker, the Honorable Charles Mock, is an elected legislator represent the functional constituency of high-tech communication. It's very important, elected. Why? The current speaker, president of the Hong Kong legislature, is an unelected monster. How many votes he got?
0.
Yeah, because he ran in business functional conditions, no contest. So he's unelected, legitimacy harbor. And then this second speaker is another legislator, and both of them share something very precious with us, which is more common in Hong Kong, but not when I was sitting in Hong Kong 2 decades or 3 decades ago. They are both North American educated.
Oh, well.
Mr. Mock's first and second degree in computer science, EE, are from the Midwest Purdue, one of the Big Ten. And then Mr. Yeung, a young solicitor, is a Canadian product, very proud, and also British product, and to be balanced, also had a degree in law from a PRC university of the highest distinction. So they are extremely well educated and represent 2 of the foremost professions. Because if Hong Kong had any future in China's grand plan, Hong Kong had to be useful, particularly as part of the high-tech hub that we are in the Silicon Valley. And also if Hong Kong is to retain its value as Hong Kong, a world city, the hardcore value must be the rule of law, constitutional order, not what someone's call a one parliamentary rubber stamp could change the fate of Hong Kong. The NPC basic law reinterpretation. So without further ado, they should each enlighten us for 20-25 minutes, and then it's Q&A.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much to my old friend, and I would also say probably teacher too. I was not fortunate enough to really had been a Stanford student and any opportunity to take Professor Chan's classes, but I still remember 25 or more years ago when I was in Silicon Valley, when I was actually working for some of the companies over here between 1990 and 1994. That was, of course, right after the June 4th massacre in Beijing. And it was a very turbulent time, again, for the Chinese community here, for the Hong Kong people here, as well as for many of the mainland students here at the time. And we had a lot of these seminars and discussions and so on. So Professor Chan is always one of our guests. We had at the time an organization of Hong Kong people actually in all of the U.S., not just Silicon Valley, that was called the Alliance of Hong Kong Chinese in the U.S., AHKS, AHKCUS. And many of our members actually today, some of them might be still working in academia and companies in the U.S., but actually a lot of them actually returned to Hong Kong, including myself, including actually some of the people who were at the time involved in the so-called pro-democracy movement at the time in the U.S. were current legislators in Hong Kong, including Gary Fan including Fernando Zhang. They were also probably present in some of the talks that Professor Chen had at that time, right here somewhere in the Bay Area. Now, I was a bit ashamed when Professor Chen introduced me as a functional constituency LegCo member, because we do run for these LegCo seats because we do believe that it is important under the current political system to fight for as big a voice as we can. But at the same time, we make it very clear. Even when I was in election forums during my previous elections, people ask you running for the functional constituency, do you oppose functional constituency? I say, of course, yes, we oppose the functional constituency. But we have to also understand that if we have to make a political change in Hong Kong, you could do it outside of the legislature. That would be one route. But if we do it inside the legislature, we need as many votes as we can, including the functional constituency votes. So, and it's also very important also to remember that professionals actually do support democracy, the majority. Why do I say that? If you look at the functional constituency seats in LegCo, there are 9 of them that are elected by majority or entirety by one professional, one vote. Social workers, teachers, engineers, computers, IT, lawyers, doctors, and accountants, and so on. There are 9 of these, nurses, and so on. 9 of these. 9 out of these 9 actually, in the last election, in 2016, the last election actually set up 8 of them. If we include the doctors, were taken by non-pro-establishment candidates. Unfortunately, Professor Alvin Yeung, his seat was taken away by the government, disqualifying him, and then taken back by a pro-establishment member. So we still hold a 7-2 majority among the professional seats. Now, this is not an excuse. I'm not saying that the functional constituency system should continue. If there's any chance tomorrow that we can have a vote to vote it down, I will vote against it. But the fact is still that professionals actually do, by and large, support democracy. Now, anyway, that's but thanks, Professor Chen, for pointing out that our LegCo president actually had 0 votes. So that made me feel so much better. But still, I want to go back to a little bit of sharing of my experience over the last year of the unfortunate experience of being called upon to be the convener of the pro-democracy camp. Every year in our pro-democracy camp, we sort of would rotate between the different political parties or factions in order that we will have somebody to at least act as a convener. It's not a position of power, actually. The convener is mainly to remind, hey, Alvin, you better come back. We have to vote very quickly, and it's more of a servant's job. I learned this term from Alvin Yeung, because Alan, when he was the convener several years ago, he said I was the assayer. He works for everybody, and I do believe that was what I was doing last year. But truly, last year I think the experience that I had was that a lot of times people would look at the pro-democracy camp, and they would think that we are very fragmented. They would think that we are, some people might be taking a more moderate stand. Some of us might be taking a more so-called radical, action-oriented, whatever, stand or position. And so we are fragmented among ourselves. I always have this answer. Our supporters are also very diverse. Our supporters are also very diversified. They expect different they vote for us because of different reasons. And it is always very important to remember the things that we have in common, not just the things that we are different. the things that we have in common about is always that the fact that we oppose interference from China. We want universal suffrage, true universal suffrage for Hong Kong, and we want Hong Kong to the distribution of not just wealth but power, political power, to be more equal in Hong Kong. We might have some different views in certain areas, and I think it's impossible, even if you look at the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, to expect them to have 100% unified on every issue, not certain issues. But that's I think it's also very important to remember about our camp. So over the last year, I think in fact my experience was quite positive in the sense that I think we were actually working very closely and very much in unity on the important issue, particularly, for example, when we were facing the challenge and eventually the pro-establishment camp was able to change the rules of procedures in the Legislative Council. That was the first crisis that we faced. And unfortunately, especially with the government disqualifying a number of our colleagues, they hold the majority to be able to just push through all these changes in a very short period of time. So, but I have to tell you that at that time, different of our players within the LegCo in the pro-democracy camp, we were working very closely together. We talk every day, our staff talk together every day almost, to make sure that strategy-wise, action-wise, what could we do? We look at the rules of procedure. How could we further filibuster when there is a chance? We have to decide on if we are going to take this action. Who is going to be the one to try to, let's say, call for an adjournment of the meeting, or who would be the person calling for an immediate emergency motion for the president to decide on, and so on. So we, at the time, actually were working very closely together. I mean, to me, I've only been in LegCo finishing my 6th year of my 1.5 term. But I have to say that last year, I think the experience of working together, some people may not believe it. Even the most radical and the most moderate, we were actually working quite closely together, very closely together. Now, of course, after that rules of procedure change, our next big, very important topic of issue that we had to face was, of course, the high-speed rail, the co-location bill of the high-speed rail that to us is a very well, Alvin as a lawyer can talk more about it, but it was a very important and actually a very detrimental law to be passed in Hong Kong because of the fact that it, in our view, violated the basic law, violated the concept of one country, two systems, but for either the sake of convenience or business or money, the government had to push it through because they believed that this particular rail will bring a lot of benefits, economic benefits to Hong Kong. We questioned those numbers, but the government, having all the votes that they need to push it through, they just passed it. At the time, we also worked very closely together. Now, a lot of times people would look at the LegCo and say that you guys, what could you do? Every time there is one of these important votes and changes, you lose. Well, I have to say that we're working in a system that is not only imperfect but unfair. It's like that you have two players. Well, it was just recently we had the World Cup, so everybody used the soccer sort of analogy. So it's like you have 11 people on your team, I only have 5. And not only that, even the referee is on your side. So what can we do? Should we give up? Or should we make sure that we will have to win back the necessary minority to have an opportunity to have the power of the veto, the important veto power. So that is actually the test that we are going to be facing. Hong Kong as a whole and the pro-democracy camp in the coming October, right? Yeah, November. Well, I forgot the date, but the November by-election of yet another by-election in the Kowloon, Kowloon West Kowloon district. Now that is going to be very important if we're going to be able to, win back one seat in order that we will have a better position to guard against further erosion of the power of LegCo by changing the rules of procedure. Now, recently, a lot of people always ask me this question, especially the media, and I don't know whether any of you might want to ask that question, but I think it's a relevant question that I will answer first. Some people are asking, this is actually, we're getting into the 1 year anniversary of the Carrie Lam regime. Now, is Carrie Lam better than CY Leung? Or is he more difficult to deal with? In some ways, CY Leung is very easy to deal with because CY Leung, he hates us, and he's totally, I don't know, he's so irrational that, he picks fights with us all the time, and a lot of times, also, our citizens in Hong Kong in general also find him to be, his popularity rating has never been high, okay? So in a sense, he's an easy target. And of course, CY Leung being totally, I don't know how to characterize him again. I don't think it's necessary. But anyway, so with him, it is very easy, okay? But when it comes to Carrie, it's like Carrie Lam is like her popularity rating is relatively high. She takes a relatively soft approach. So citizens, it's not as easy for citizens to take a black and white kind of a attitude toward us, the pro-democracy camp, as the opposition with the government. So I do believe that in that sense, it is a little bit more difficult for us to work with. But on the other hand, I think we also have a responsibility to make sure that we are dealing with the issues and not just dealing with the person. In a way, I think it is also important for us to be able to learn, or for Hong Kong people to learn to take a more mature approach in this kind of a political situation. That, okay, for example, I think this week everybody is looking at the MTR debacles, all these engineering problems and so on. Now, I think every time when there is this issue, and this particular instance, it reminds me of what happened 3-4 years ago, when at the time almost the identical thing happened with the cost overrun of the high-speed of the express rail project. And at the time, even during the CY Leung administration, we were actually able to set up a investigation committee, a standing committee in LegCo to investigate that particular incident. Even though we didn't get the power and privilege power for LegCo to call witnesses and so on, we didn't get that because the pro-establishment didn't allow us. But they changed the rules of procedure. We couldn't do it now. But at that time, even at least we could do it. Now this time, this is a total repeat of the same incident. The government, what did they do? They choose a time when they choose the summer vacation or the summer break, summer recess, to suddenly fire a few of the chairman, the senior executives of the MTR and try to bury the whole incident. Now, I hope you will still remember, just before the end of the session, actually, we proposed 3 powers and privilege motion in LegCo to try to investigate that particular incident. And it was all denied by the pro-establishment. Now, I think it is only up to the intelligence and the moral capacity of our citizens to decide, to understand these issues and see that who is really protecting citizens' interests, who is really on their side. If the citizens, after the government in collusion with the pro-establishment, block all these investigations, and now finally they admitted that these problems are real, and you know, to the extent that they have to, you know, admit all these facts, and also fire all these people, remove all these people from the MTR company, and they still think that what we did at the time, if the citizens still don't believe that what we did at the time, to call for these investigations by having our necessary representation in the LegCo to call for these investigations, if they still think that this is not enough, this is not the right thing to do, I should say, this is not the right thing to do, then I don't know what to say. So it's a test to our citizens as well, to look at the issues and understand that, you know, who is really trying to do the right thing, to monitor the government, to expose these collusion between the possibly some businesses and the government or some agencies. This is what I hope we will continue to function in LegCo to try to bring some sense to to Hong Kong. And finally, one final point. I think I tend to go on long, but one final point. We are here because, of course, partially because, you know, our government like to talk a lot about the Greater Bay Area. You know, Taiwan, they like to talk about that a lot. You know, Hong Kong people have been doing business in China and in Guangdong and in the whole of China for a long time. Why do we need another name and so on? Is it a scheme by Beijing to try to fully integrate Hong Kong and so on? Well, we, Alvin and I, and some of the other pro-democracy, the Democratic camp legislature, we did go to Taiwan, to the Greater Bay Area to a few months ago, and to me, it, you know, whether you consider them to be our competitors or they are our partners or they're just our next door neighbor that we don't say hello to, I do think that we have to understand what they're doing. So in that sense, we did that, and we came back with a strong observation that, in fact, for Hong Kong, or even for China and for the Greater Bay Area, for them, it is most important for us to maintain the one country, two system, rule of law that we have in Hong Kong. It is being challenged, it is under erosion, but we have to make sure that we stand firm and not let it deteriorate. Or otherwise, you know, the consequence will be serious. I mean, you have to believe that, you have to remember that there are a lot of us in Hong Kong that are not in a position to say that they will be able to leave or they will be able to seek a better fortune elsewhere. And if our next generation is going to be fooled by the government in the fact that you know, this total integration is going to be helpful for them, it would not be, in my view, a good thing. We have to remember that Hong Kong, whether it be for our future economic success or for our social identity or for any other purpose, we have to make sure that we have our own identity and we have to have our own, we have to maintain our international status. And this week, we have been meeting some of the city officials around the Bay Area as well as companies around here, tech companies around here. And I think that is the strong message that we want to bring to them, that, you know, we want to have, we want to maintain Hong Kong as an international city. That's only for the good of everybody. And of course, maybe Alvin, later on, I took too much time, maybe you will take some time to talk about the recent U.S.-China conflicts and so on, and whether or not what kind of impact that is going to have on Hong Kong. Because I think I took too much time. I'll leave that to. No. I'll leave that to Alvin and some of the other things that he would like to share. But hopefully we'll get to your questions soon, and we'll try to answer all of them. Thank you.
While you are still here, you could let Mr. Yeung come out. Then I would present on behalf of Stanford a little bit memento.
Sure. Thank you.
On behalf of the Center Asian Study, a campus map so you don't get lost next time.
Thank you. You're giving us this to us now.
Okay,
Thank you.
1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. All right.
Thank you.
We make it a very illuminating academic event. I call it a seminar. And you people, if vividly recall what I introduced, I didn't mention any party affiliation, so no one could accuse me of partisan. Because, Hong Kong government and Hong Kong henchmen for Beijing pick up people's overseas presentation, accuse them of this and that and that. And that's why Stanford asked me, usually we give honorarium to speaker. Of course, you people come up last minute and end of the year no budget. I said no, because last time there were Martin Lee, Wang Zhenman, all the top 10 people from Hong Kong, not a single dime. And then 2013, when Wang Zhifeng was here, he was a private person, no presentation. And then 2 years ago when he was here, no honorarium. And I would tell you, you are singing for your dinner, but I won't pay for your share of dinner. Because Alan, who had a Hong Kong passport, would host your part of the dinner. So
Thank you.
Stanford and myself, I hold US passport, would not interfere in your domestic Hong Kong politics.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Yeung, you have 20-25 minutes.
Thank you, Professor, and hello all. It's a pleasure to be here. Charles update you about the political issues in Hong Kong. In the next 20 minutes or so, I wish to share the constitutional challenges that Hong Kong is facing, especially in this post-umbrella movement era, especially on what happened to us, the opposition in general, the descendants, how are we facing up this government, especially with Beijing at the back. And at the end of it, I wish to cover a bit of our observations regarding the trade war and how should Hong Kong position ourselves in between the two giants, namely China and the US. I am a barrister, so I have some legal training. I am, in fact, still a practicing barrister. So legal issues are very sensitive to people like us. You must be fully aware that Hong Kong, under one country, two systems, the gist of one country, two system is that, of course, we have our own way of doing things. But most importantly is we share a completely different legal system than that of the PRC. And in Hong Kong, we have the common law. We do our way in the British way. Somewhat American shares the same way of doing things in the courts. We have the basic law, that is the mini constitution that guarantees Hong Kong's basic rights. And in gist, under one country, two system, Hong Kong people believe that save and accept foreign affairs and defense, we are basically on our own. And that was guaranteed by Beijing back in 1984 in the joint declaration with the British. That was the guarantee. To us, that was the contract of our ways of doing life, or our ways of life after 97. And what happened over the past 21 years, of course, is not completely happy, and especially since the umbrella movement, we see the government of Hong Kong has been harsher and harsher on the descendants. I will name two examples so you would have a better understanding of what really happened recently. But before I move on to that, I'll give you one background of the Basic Law. That is, under the Basic Law, the courts of Hong Kong, we have the final say. We have a court of final appeal that is similar to your Supreme Court, except there's one clause, one article in the Basic Law that allows Beijing, namely the National People's Congress Standing Committee, that is their Congress, a standing committee that they have a meeting every 2 months, to have the final power of interpretation of the Basic Law. But that is not the end of it. Under that particular clause, it also says very clearly that it would be the power of the final appeal court to ask the National People's Congress Standing Committee to issue an interpretation when it comes to issues that the court of final appeal have concerns about foreign affairs or defense. So that should be the framework of this Basic Law. So if you fully understand, if you're with me, then you would have full confidence that in normal circumstances, on the day in, day out circumstances, the Court of Final Appeal would be able to enjoy the final say. But I can tell you that over the past 21 years, we have 5 incidents of this interpretation of the Basic Law, and the most recent one took place in 2016. What happened in 2016? There was a general election took place in September, and we returned around 30 opposition members. It's part of a fashion that usually some of our opposition members would, when they take oath before they assume office, we still have seats here, come on. Some of our opposition members would put up a protest when they take their oath. There were no problems over the past 12 years, and people were happy with that. Of course, they attract some criticisms to a certain extent, but everybody was fine with that. And they had their job, and they continued to take up their legislative job, their duties. But in 2016, we had a group of legislators elect put up a protest in their oath-taking, and 2 of them expressed their very strongest separatist ideology in their oath-taking. And the Hong Kong government immediately filed a judicial review against their legitimacy of oath-taking. And before the court have any final decision in the court of first instance, before the court has made up their mind, the Hong Kong government invite the National Standing Committee to have an interpretation of the Basic Law, the relevant clauses of the Basic Law. And then just the National People's Congress Standing Committee issued an interpretation that legislators are not allowed to have anything, to say anything other than the oath. So I'm not going to get into the gist of the interpretations or anything highly legal, because after all, we are not having a legal lecture here. But the gist of it is, since there was an interpretation, the Court of First Instance of the Hong Kong High Court had no choice but to accept the interpretation, and of course, by result of that, disqualified the 2 legislators elect and 4 more in the following few months. So we had 6 people elected, popularly elected members, got disqualified by the interpretation of Beijing, and they are all, of course, from the camp of the opposition. So when Charles mentioned about the by-election that is going to take place in November, that is one of the many seats, one of the 6 seats that we have to fill in. So that is one of the incidents, one of the 5 interpretations. The second example I wish to give you is the express rail terminus. So, of course, it's good, right? It's good to have high-speed rail. It's good to have you connected with your neighbors and get on the train, and you can go anywhere within 2 or 3 hours when you have to take 6 or 7 hours in the old days. It's perfect, right? But before we fully embrace this convenience, I also have to tell you that the design of this terminus is designed will be located in the center of Hong Kong. So those of you who are not familiar with Hong Kong, there's a district called Kowloon, and that is in the heart of Hong Kong. There will be a terminus of this express rail going to be located. Well, of course, it's good to have your express rail terminus located in a very convenient area. However, I need to tell you is inside this terminus, there will be one floor designated to run Chinese law. So they need to introduce this co-location arrangement, similar to the one that you have when you go to Canada. So you can do your custom and immigration checkout in your US airport and vice versa. Similar to the one that you have in London and Paris. Well, of course, it sounds still okay, right? Because it's quite convenient. But I need to tell you is in the framework of the basic law, Chinese laws are not supposed to be applicable in Hong Kong because we need to make sure that their legal system would not mess up with ours. They have their ways of doing things, we have ours. Under Article 18 of the basic law, Chinese laws are not applicable in Hong Kong. Article 22, Chinese law enforcement agencies cannot practice laws in Hong Kong. But by having this terminus, by introducing this co-location arrangement in the heart of Hong Kong, that is in fact a bridge of the basic law of the spirit of one country, two systems. It's most unfortunate that this has become law, and we will have it become, the terminus will be in operation the soonest by the later this year. It's not perfect, but I am naming all these examples to you that sometimes Hong Kong people, they're not fully with us. I am telling you from the legal point of view. I'm telling you from the rule of law point of view. And of course, you might think, yeah, there might be some problems. But the difficulties, the challenges we face, of course, they're not only from Beijing, but also some of our fellow Hong Kongers, they might not fully with us. They might not see the problems that we see because they see convenience over the rule of law. They see that anyone with an ideology of separation is so much so that we might not fully agree with them, but we still embrace freedom of expression. But not every Hong Kong citizen share this value. So this is an uphill battle for Charles and I and our colleagues to try to win more hearts of the Hong Kong people, to let them understand the importance of the rule of law, because this is what I am going to talk about, the position of Hong Kong in this US and China trade war. How rule of law is important to us, because in a perfectly peaceful day, you wouldn't think about the rule of law. You wouldn't see the rule of law as anything important to your city, to your country. No, because everything's perfect. But now there's a trade war going on between the two giants. Not that we can do anything about it, because we are politicians of neither places. But Hong Kong is a unique place in this situation. Maybe for your information, I'm not sure whether you're fully aware of that, is Hong Kong gives the biggest trade surplus to the US in 2016. We provided $32.5 billion trade surplus to the US. And we are the biggest goods importer of your US goods. And when you have problems with exporting your beefs to any other countries, Hong Kong has been eating US beef on a daily basis.
That's why we are all mad cow disease.
Perhaps this is why I suspect the leadership of Hong Kong has been eating US beef on a daily basis.
That's why they're mad.
But this is the background of Hong Kong. We have been one of the best trading partners of America. And under the US Hong Kong Act, Hong Kong enjoys a special status in the US. We are not an ordinary city of China. And in fact, that is something China agrees. Under the basic law, Hong Kong is an independent custom territory. We are an independent member in the WTO on our own right. So when it comes to trade, U.S. supposed to treat Hong Kong different from China, from mainland China, and that serves interest to both countries, China and U.S. Of course, from U.S. point of view, we have been a perfect trading partner. Why not? From the Chinese point of view, there's no harm done to them when Hong Kong can have our own role to play when it comes to international trade. So what would be our position when it comes to this trade war? There are risks and there are opportunities. When it comes to risks, that is, what if the foreign investors, especially the US government, no longer treat Hong Kong as a unique place, when Hong Kong no longer can give confidence to the rest of the world that one country, two systems still exists. That is our biggest concern. And when it comes to one country, two systems, of course, the rule of law is essential to one country, two systems. So the first part of my sharing, the interpretations, the collocation bill that introduced to Hong Kong, these are damages to the international confidence of the rule of law of Hong Kong. But of course, we lawyers, we're still trying very hard. We're still doing our job in court. Our judges are still acting independently. So if you ask me, is the rule of law dead in Hong Kong? I would say is under challenge, is some damages done, but it's not that yet. Because each and every player in the legal system are doing our jobs. And we're trying very hard to make sure that the Chinese encroachment will not step further. But of course, I must say it's not easy. And there are a lot of challenges ahead. This is the risk. But what about the opportunities? I would say if we can stay unique, if Hong Kong can uphold one country, two systems, and guarantee the rest of the world that we are no ordinary city of China, it's safe to do business with Hong Kong, it's safe to invest in Hong Kong, then I cannot see why we should be penalized in the trade war. And in fact, I was in Washington, D.C. 2-3 months ago to try to lobby and convince the U.S. policymakers to grant an exemption of Section 232 on Hong Kong. And during the visit, every person we met, either on the Hill or the ones in the administration or executive branch, they all agree that Hong Kong has been doing a great job when it comes to IP protection, when it comes to a transparent system. So, of course, it's most unfortunate that Section 232 is a universal, is universal, that is applicable to almost every trading partner of the US. But the point I wish to make is, if Hong Kong can continue to stay unique, and if the senior leadership of Hong Kong is aware of this, then there are still opportunities for Hong Kong, and of course for Hong Kong people. Otherwise, if we start losing our special characters, that is one country, two system, then we'll be just like any other ordinary city of China, and nobody will be interested in doing trade with Hong Kong, and that will in effect harm Hong Kong and mainland China. So that's my observation. I'm sure Charles shares my view. We have been talking about this over the past months. So that's a bit of the sharing from me, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Before the open for Q&A, I have two announcements, not by me. This is the first of the triple public presentation. They had to sing for the dinner for sure. Saturday, the 11th of August, I think 4 to 6 in the afternoon, they would mount another forum at The Answer, and Heyman Wong, who is a student and also a student trustee at The Answer, could give you a bit detail. Exactly where and all that.
So we're gonna hold a seminar for both honorable legislative counselor at the Answer College for a seminar, and the title is gonna be regarding to the Hong Kong relationship and how Hong Kong can use Silicon Valley as a technology hub to enhance Hong Kong and the relations in between. So the location is going to be at the NC College, Forum 3. So parking is there are a lot of the closest parking structure is going to be parking lot C. So permits is required. So you guys can find the permit machine like in the parking lots. So the event is going to be 4 to 6 on Saturday.
Thank you.
I suppose you host it on the web, right? And Ken Chan, could you announce which is a very limited opportunity because the space has been Saturday evening, right after the presentation at the answer, the Hong Kong Club of Northern California, of which he is a mastermind, not the mastermind, is hosting a dinner in Dynasty Restaurant. Could you give the detail?
I think this is a private dinner, so I think
But
the
who
people-
are members should be reminded.
Right. We will send out email to the people already. We are going to the dinner. So probably I would want to mention about the KTSF talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are to be on TV as usual.
Right. I think everybody probably will not get enough of Charles and Evan, right? Since there's a lot of going on in Hong Kong, and also they have done a lot, and also they have a great achiever in their own profession. So I don't think we have enough time to cover everything. So also the KTSF channel 26 in this Friday, they have a talk show called Talk Today, 有話要說. So they have
In Mandarin, right? Or in 普通話?
yes, and in Mandarin, since Hong Kong is an international city, so our legislator already showed the perfect English. So next we're going to see how they perform in Mandarin. So there will be three different times. So the live broadcast will be Friday at 12 at noon, and then the broadcast will be same day at 11, if I remember correctly.
11 at night, right?
Yes, and then Sunday will be 7:30. If you
PM.
PM, yes, correct. So if you can't catch any of this, and then they will post it on the website. So something like Monday or Tuesday. So if you like Hong Kong Club's Facebook page, we will post the broadcast after they put it on the web. Thank you.
Now the floor is open, and I could start with a very common Cantonese or Chinese proverb. Bear with me for those who is not Chinese proficient. The Hong Kong situation, the regime and society, particularly democratic camp, are facing crisis after crisis. And if people ask me, use a little bit adjective, forward proverb, I would say, 無法無天,無法無天. Why? The Hong Kong government need 2 or 3 very powerful law that is anti-democratic and the human right, the national anthem law and the finalization of a missing link in Beijing's obsession for control, Article 23 national security legislation. So far the regime had not had these 2 laws, 無法. As Wu Tian, well, the Beijing regime and its henchmen, Chief Xi Leung, had been very keen to cook up a bubble. The arsonist set fire so he could play the role of fire captain, call Hong Kong independent, which I put in quotation, which is not a viable alternative nor mainstream academic discussion forever. So the 2 young persons who had political ambition, both in their middle name, Leung Tin Kei, Tan Ho Tin, Edward, and Andy. One was disqualified from running in the legislature, and that's why in the by-election, Alvin was the successful contestant. Thank God. But then the last round of electoral exercise, there's a young lady who was here in the late April Hong Kong Week talk, Miss Agnes Chow, she was disqualified from even accepting her filing to register as a contest, as a candidate, let alone jump into the arena. And then now the Hong Kong government invoked what was British colonial legacy, an article called Society Ordinance, that the chief of police acting as commissioner for society, register for societies, organizations, could deem someone as, or some organ as outlaw for the very fact that this Andy Chen, Chen Ho Tin, another Sky, both their name had Sky. So I would say Hong Kong crisis is 无法无天, 无法无天. And then how you make sense is a big question mark, and please feel free, and you could address an open question or specifically Mr. Mark or Mr. Yeung, that is the one that you want to target. Anyone? Don't be shy. Mm-hmm.
I'm Scott McLeod from Massachusetts Institute of Technology OpenCourseWare World University and School, which is like Wikipedia too. MIT OpenCourseWare is in Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
My question, I think, has to do with the Stanford Law China Guiding Cases project, which since 2011, I think, has translated 87 cases from the Beijing Supreme Court in a time of legal reform, and then given feedback to the Beijing Supreme Court, as I understand, under the directorship of May Getchlich here at Stanford Law. And I'm curious how that might affect, or whether any rulings so far, which I haven't followed closely at all, might have a bearing on democratic Hong Kong, or this focus going ahead. Whether you have any indication of that, or whether it even plays a role in Chinese thinking at this point, the China Guiding Cases, or the new Beijing Supreme Court.
Well, thank you, Scott. I'm not following the latest development in the legal court reforms in China, so I'm afraid that there's nothing really much I can help regarding your questions. I understand there are some positive reforms going on in China, but then they are not significant enough to give confidence to Hong Kong people that they are doing the rule of law way, the way that we expect. So that's a very short remark I can give. Yeah.
Yeah, so recently the Hong Kong government and the mainstream media have been spreading a message that Hong Kong people are Chinese, but there are many Hong Kong people who are like from South Asia, or they have like Caucasian background, or just like people with no Chinese origins. So my question is, how by spreading the message that all Hong Kong people are Chinese, are we alienating these minority groups? Are we undermining the image that Hong Kong is an international city? And my question is, how can we become a more cohesive society as globalization continues and immigration is going to pull in more talents from other countries?
I'll try first, and then Alvin can help. This is definitely true. To me, I think the Hong Kong government right now takes a politics first, and even China politics first attitude toward most questions or issues. The upcoming national anthem law is a good example of the kind of conflict that you raise up. There are many of these minorities in Hong Kong. They go to school in Hong Kong. They are being discriminated against because of the fact that they may not speak Chinese, and some of them do speak Cantonese, but they do not write as well as Chinese do, and they are already discriminated under the current school system. That many of them, even though they might qualify otherwise, but under our system in Hong Kong, they do not qualify to get themselves into university, for example. So that's just that, and then right now, I mean, if you require them to, let's say, in the upcoming national anthems law, and they have to learn about and singing the national anthems and so on, to them, and also to foreign nationals in Hong Kong, how's the law going to treat them if they put in all these? It's not the same as the U.S. when you also have a lot of controversy about the singing of the national anthems, right? But you don't put people into criminal liability because of that. The most is, and I don't think that is fair either, the most is your president telling the boss to fire those players, right? But I don't think that's fair either. But still, he couldn't arrest them or have the police arrest them, or not necessarily putting them in jail, depending on the maximum sentence, but give them criminal liability, right? But that's what we're talking about in Hong Kong. So, and I think that is going to be also another upcoming case that will further alienate, in your words, and I agree, alienate the relationship between the minorities in Hong Kong and also foreign nationals or even visitors in Hong Kong. And I think that is uncalled for and unnecessary for Hong Kong. Now, we will do our best to try to oppose the law or make sure that the law is not going to have this kind of detrimental effects. Of course, the government hasn't really tabled the final law yet, but I would assume that under the current political situation, they will want to repeat it and just want to push it through as quickly as possible. But in general, yes, our overall the Democratic camp on this issue is very united in our position. But I guess the problems that we see, this problem and other problems that Professor Chan referred to, this 無法無天 situation, lawlessness situation from the government. My response is, it is a dire situation for Hong Kong. It is a very in crisis situation for us in the opposition camp. But I think, and we bear a lot of responsibility as well. We bear the responsibility of telling us, of passing the message to our citizens so that they care. If they don't care and they continue to vote for the pro-establishment candidates because they get 蛇齋餅粽, they get all these goodies and gift packs, and they vote for the pro-China, pro-democracy candidates, then we have a problem. The problem is what? The problem is, why are we not getting the message across to the people that Hong Kong is in crisis? A lot of people say that after the umbrella movement, we're in a low tide period, and that's true. But how do we get back to a higher tide? That's the question. I don't have a full answer, but I think it is also important not only to look for the political parties, or I don't want to say leaders because I don't consider myself a leader, but the politicians, But I think our people have to look into themselves. And I think in some ways, I hope maybe some of you would identify with it, because in many ways, I look at what Donald Trump is doing, it reminds me of C.Y. Leung. So, so I'm saying that, if many of the people here consider your president at the moment to be a problem, you have to ask, why are so many people in support of it? And that's the question I keep on asking myself. Why are so many people not really caring about this in crisis situation? I don't have the full answer. I hope Professor Chan maybe can give us some guidance from the political science or history point of view to help us, engage the people. How do we do that? Anything?
Charles basically highlighted the points I wish to make, but perhaps we can just stand here. I just wish to make one point, may not directly related to your question, but the last part that Charles just talked about. I recall I read a piece of article on the New York Times, Sunday New York Times, a couple of months ago. It reads, "The liberals are too clever." Assuming that some of you are liberals, like myself, we always assume and take it for granted that people are supposed to to share our views. We always take it for granted that those in the opposition, or those people who are in opposition to our values, they are idiots. They are stupid. They are not smart enough. But as Charles said, why are there so many people voting for the other guy? That other guy could be anybody, right? It always comes back to me and strikes me that, are we not doing enough? Are we not engaging enough? Are we too arrogant when it comes to conveying our messages? Earlier when I was having my sharing, I said, people in Hong Kong, they are not fully aware, or they don't care to have a terminus in the center of Hong Kong practicing with one floor, practicing Chinese law. They don't care because they see the convenience of it. They don't care ousting 2 opposition or 6 opposition legislators elect for taking oath in an extraordinary way. They don't care because they thought it's fine. So there is a growing number of people who are on the other side. And it's probably similar to your situation here. I don't want to get into your politics, but Charles reminds me of the image of having someone having too much US beef running the country or the city. So too mad. The lady. Oh, okay.
So really quickly, so I was in Hong Kong in 1997 in Andover, and what I noticed from my relatives and friends in the younger generation, it was a holiday, so they went to play tennis. They didn't really care for the celebration. But a lot of expats like us, we were kind of really excited because there's a history, and but the local Hong Kong people were very sad. It's like a really huge question mark, and I noticed that Hong Kong people are very complacent under the British rule. And then it's really strange that as we see the first 21 years, that the new Hong Kong, young Hong Kong people are not as complacent. They're not really tied to the British, they're not really tied to Chinese, but they are very happy to be Hong Kong Chinese. So can you explain to me maybe how can you get your message more out post 1997 and at the 21st anniversary? And what do you expect in 2047? We hope that the basic law will sustain itself to 2047, and what can we negotiate with the central government to continue the prosperity of Hong Kong, and how can American citizens like me, who are friends of Hong Kong, my parents are from Hong Kong, how can we support you legislators, and I'm a politician, you're a politician, that how can we lobby our Congress folks to support the prosperity of Hong Kong as well as prosperity of China? We must work together, and maybe a slight, I don't know, subject, a comparison of what's going on in Taiwan.
He was the mayor of the city of Cupertino, on whose site the Answer College is located. And of course, he is still a trustee of the community college system, the Answer and Foothill.
Hello. Thank you. Okay. You want to try first, or
It's a big question, and we can talk for days about 2047. But you have a few questions in your big question. No.
but it's okay. Yeah.
But we've been thinking about how to talk to the younger generation, and in fact, I trust politicians across the world are having issues with the younger generation because. Charles, of course, is slightly older. A lot older. We try to, let's put it this way. When you communicate with the younger generation, they accept no BS. You have to be frank, you have to be direct, you have to tell them the truth. Sometimes I think that is the gist of that. But it's not easy, I must confess. It's never easy to be straightforward and frank when it comes to politics because there are always bigger issues. It always requires a lot of explanations, but attention span of this generation, in fact not the younger generation, but everybody here, is getting shorter and shorter. So you only allow 3 seconds of your Facebook or Twitter. So how on earth could you explain a bigger issue when it comes to something controversial. That is our challenge. So it doesn't limit to the younger generation. The second question is 24/7. Of course, I wish we could continue to have one country, two system. I think it's not easy to predict what will happen by 24/7. But I would say we are trying everything to lay the foundations that leads up to 24/7. And when it comes to 24/7, you have to convince the Beijing leadership, then the future Beijing leadership, that it serves them good, it serves them the interest that to keep Hong Kong unique. But how are we going to do it? We have a couple of decades to work on that. To be frank, there's no way we don't have a crystal ball here, but I wish we could continue to have one country, two system by that. And the last question is, how could you help us? I think that the simplest question, or the simplest answer is, you have your friends in Hong Kong. So whenever it comes to something that strikes you, something that you think is a problem, then you have to remind them. You have to talk to them. It's easier for you to talk to your friends in Hong Kong than us, because we as politicians, they have already turned, they would say, these politicians, they would say something completely biased. But if that has come from you, that might be slightly more helpful. When it comes to election time, you may help us to remind them to go to vote. It could be anybody. It's fine. We respect independent thinking. But at the end of the day, is the actions in Hong Kong, the people on the ground, that matters. So how are we going to convince them to take action? Of course, we have a job to do, but then if you could remind your friends, families in Hong Kong, that might also help.
Just a couple of quick points to add to what Alvin said. First, I pick up 2 points that I want to respond to your question. Thank you. First is, I think you pointing out to an identity issue with our young people, right? And like Alvin said, part of it is international. Part of it is this whole millennial generation stuff has a lot to do with the technology that they use, that we use, especially the younger people, because they grew up with it, right? So which brings me back to the situation in Hong Kong. What's different for Hong Kong than the young people here or in other cities? A couple of points of difference. Maybe the rest is the same, but the first point is empowerment. They feel that they are not empowered. I look at people here, I think young people will still have a hard time trying to save enough money to buy a house. They're also very expensive here.
Especially
here, right? In this area, not just this city and the whole Bay Area, and or in many of the big cities around the world, right? But at least they are empowered politically. They can vote for their leaders or their congressmen or their city council or whatever, right? They can vote for the leaders. They can make changes. They can participate into the system and not get disqualified, right? Even if you don't necessarily have to agree with what everybody is saying, but let them run. They might win or they might lose, but now this is a Chinese way, right, to disqualify you. This is the kind of thing, you don't have to be a lawyer to feel that this is unfair. And I think the young people are especially turned off by this sort of things, even though they are not necessarily born to be very political and so on. And this, I think, is also a vicious cycle. This lack of empowerment, lack of feeling of sharing of power, including political power, and also economic power, right? Because I also mentioned, things, this sharing of economic wealth, but we won't get into that in details, but I think it's clear to see that in Hong Kong, we have a big problem with the domination by, a small group of very, very rich entities.
Top 1%?
Yeah, top 1%. So anyway, they see it, and then they feel hopeless. Some of them will get, quote unquote, very radical. Some of them will say, well, then I just live a very laid back and disengaged life. That's the problem. right? So I think that's what I am observing. I just want to relate it back to the political system and the economic reality in Hong Kong, which is in some ways worse than in other big cities and developed countries in the world. And finally, the other point about what Americans can possibly do. I don't care if people say that this is causing foreign interference or whatever. To me, this is encouraging international engagement, right? We're an international city. So I hope that Americans, other countries, Canadians, other countries will be able to, voice out to your representatives, your leadership, to say that, situation in Hong Kong, problems there, actually do affect your own country.
Your interest.
Economic interest and other interest, right? Alvin mentioned about intellectual property and other stuff. If there is no not fair political and economic system in those countries, including like China, that's why there are these problems that would cause unfair economic trade and intellectual property thefts and so on, right? It all goes back to that. So why do I do want to say that I didn't go to the trip with Alvin a few months ago to Washington. I went a couple years before. I can tell you that even when I talked to the last administration, they didn't care so much about democracy in Hong Kong. They care about, hey, when are you going to pass your IP law and stuff of that nature. Much more than when I talk to them about democracy and universal suffrage issues in Hong Kong, and they say, well, there's not so much we can do, and so on, blah blah blah. This is we cannot interfere with Hong Kong and so on. This is, I'm talking about the last administration. Think about this, right? So I think a lot of it, you can do a lot. Actually, Americans here can do a lot with your own representatives. And we're going to be in London next month, and we'll bring the same message to the UK government.
Alan.
Yeah, I'm Alan, a private citizen of Hong Kong, and I just want to do a quick follow-up on the identity issue for the American friends in the audience. It's not that Hong Kong people do not want national education or national anthem. It is the Chinese Communist Party is pretty good in mixing the concept of nationalism with ethnicity, and Hong Kong in its current form has enjoyed civil liberties since the British rule. And Hong Kong has never seen democracy, but it has seen a certain degree of civil liberties because the sovereignty before 1997 was a democratically elected constitutional monarchy. And now if the Chinese Communist Party just want to force upon us to pledge allegiance to a authoritarian regime, then that's something that we as a freed people would stand up to in the face of authoritarianism. And that has a lot of that is by and large related to young people like the ones who were coming in protest and of my generation, that we have been frustrated after the Umbrella Revolution and also the Mong Kok incident, because we don't see any hope within the Hong Kong constitutional system to fight against unconstitutional interference from the Chinese Communist regime. And so it's wonderful that we have the honorable gentleman here and hopefully connecting with other politicians who still care about Hong Kong here in the United States and also in London. My question, I posed the same question when former Governor Christopher Patton came to Hong Kong last October to sell his book. Is that because Hong Kong, in its product, it's different from Taiwan or other aspiring democracies. Hong Kong's strength is based upon an internationally lodged treaty in the United Nations, the Sino-British Joint Declaration. If we cannot amount enough power against the dictatorship, can we appeal to the other sovereignty signatory, the UK government, in seeing what they can do, or at least lobby for the British national overseas status, and also part two of the question is what can we, because you asked us, we are willing to support, but there's no mechanism in the United States or in the United Kingdom for us to do lobbying effort. Is that something that Charles, you as a leader of the Pan-Democratic camp, and also Alvin as the leader of the Civic Party, is that something that you can coordinate in Hong Kong as the non-pro-establishment camp to coordinate forces outside of Hong Kong to lobby against the dictatorship?
Okay, I'll try briefly to answer. First of all, my term is ending. Okay,
Oh.
so in maybe less than wonderful for me. I don't know. Less than a month's time, Claudia Mo will be taking up the convener work for our camp. Okay, I think it's a wonderful suggestion. It doesn't really occur to us, or it isn't. Unfortunately, I have to say that it should be more on our mind about how to engage the international help from actually not just international. It sounds like so foreign, but our Hong Kong people outside of Hong Kong who still care about Hong Kong. I used to be one of them, right? Because we formed such an association more than 20 years ago to work on those issues. And I think it's important because it brings a lot of people. It keeps them interested and engaged and continue to be engaged, whether they are still overseas or they eventually, maybe one day you go back to Hong Kong, you take up our position and you'll be much more, do much better than we do. And that would be wonderful, right? So I think now the point about finding some issues, whether they be fighting for BNO rights or others, to engage the people here is important. And I do want to share maybe a small experience, at the time, 20 some years ago, at least we were able to sustain it for about almost 10 years, our association. It's not easy to have an association of at least, hopefully around 50 or 100 active people all around the US to try to, at the time, 20 more years ago, we're pushing the US Congress to really show more concern about the negotiation between Britain and China about the future of Hong Kong, and we try to push for at the time foreign overseas voting rights. Professor Chen, I don't know if you remember, we try to push for overseas voting rights for overseas Hong Kongers, similar to Americans being able to vote when they are overseas during the voting period. So we actually do that. So I think in a way, okay, we definitely should work more closely together. But whether or not we will keep on finding those possible issues to work together, like BNO or maybe even overseas voting rights again, however impossible it looks like at the moment. But it also is quite important to try to organize people here to have a more stable base of supporters that will be able to really contribute and help our cause. When we need to speak to U.S. politicians, parties, and congressmen and so on to lobby on certain issues, we could only skip out of Hong Kong once in a while during the summer. It's very, very difficult to do that during the term, during the rest of the year. Then we might have to rely on partners over here on the ground to help us do that. So how do we work that out? I think it's a great idea, but I'm not just throwing the ball back at you. But I think if we can work that out, it will be good. It will be useful.
We are willing to do that, but
Yeah.
it has to be a concerted effort
Yes.
from Hong Kong, the home base, and also
Yes.
for us being overseas.
Yes, I think we should have a further discussion about that, and between
We'll follow up with you on that.
our camp, we will bring it back too. I mean, these days, sometimes it's all about relationship. Okay, sometimes Lei Chok Yan is still going to tell us that our old friends from Toronto, 30 years ago almost, when we were working together at the post Tiananmen movement, right? Our old friends is visiting from Canada. Can we get together and they can update us what's going on in Canada about people that might be still holding up that torch in Canada. Some of us still have that relationship, and I think it's great that if we develop a new relationship with the new generation, like you guys and so on, and try to work out, find the issues. So we work on both sides. Yeah. Thank you.
Charles basically covered my thoughts. Although I wouldn't be overly optimistic of the British, knowing that they are having a Brexit and they are working very hard to reach out to other economies,
Make money.
and but of course, part of our trip will be we try to speak to our friends over there, politicians in London, to see what can be done. But we, of course, we do our part, although we don't have overly high hopes, but we'll still try.
We can try to do our part. And apart from the executive and the legislative route that you commented that it would be very hard for Great Britain to help us, is the judiciary path open for exploration in checking with the courts of whether with all the background that's going on with the eroding situation in the one country, two systems situation in Hong Kong under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, whether that would amount to enough grounds to explore a judiciary action to have the British National Overseas right of abode and in the UK reviewed.
It would take us quite some time to.
But it would be open for exploration.
Of course. I'm not saying it's a no. And in fact, it's a brand new topic. It requires someone to take initiative to take up some legal actions in England, some BNO holders, to try it. But that's a completely different big project.
But we can work on that going forward.
It's of course possible. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you, Mr. Yeung, thank you, Mr. Ma. It was very unfortunate that the rule of law was impaired significantly recently, most notably by the implementation of Chinese law and disqualification of legislators. So I have two questions. The first question is, do you guys see anything in the pipeline, like what's the next big thing that the government would, or that would potentially happen in relation to the rule of law? And my second question is, it seems like by the design of the system and the composition of the LegCo, it will be an uphill battle, but it will be very hard for you to win by vote. So do you have any other strategies that might help you win the war when it comes up next time?
Yeah. Thank you. What's in the pipeline? I wish there's none, but of course, the national anthem law, of course, is on the way. That's number one. Article 23's legislation, of course, is always at the back of our mind. Beijing and those pro-Beijing people, the hardcore leftists, they have been calling the Hong Kong government to enact the legislation. Of course, from our observation, it's not immediate concern. I understand this administration is not eager to get it done yet, but God knows, because whenever Beijing press the button, they have to do it. So I only wish they don't see it as urgent yet. But Article 23 is always there. So this too. And for your second question, I've already forgotten.
I'll try first. Okay.
Yeah, you try first, and I'll follow.
Okay. Okay. I want to add one more item to what Alvin talked about. I mean, one of our LegCo colleagues sent to our WhatsApp group, and I just saw it not so long ago, that our pro-establishment legislator colleagues are actually calling for yet another round of erosion of LegCo's power by further, for example, punishing the legislators who would disrupt a meeting and get ejected from a meeting. They believe that they should be suspended, like players in a ball game. Okay, you get ejected, you get a red card, you gotta be suspended for 2 games or whatever, right? So they're resorting to this again, and I think it's not only it may or may not be Beijing pushing the button. I think in a way, in the post-CY Leung era, pro-establishment legislators have no issue to rally their supporters. Okay, imagine there are a lot of their supporters too. And think about it, this is common. I mean, you think about what Donald Trump would do about rallying his supporters. You know, the pro-establishment right now is saying, you know, look, they want to divert attention. You know, they try to protect MTR and the government from the scandal. So right now, in the heat of this, they talked about punishing those legislators who are disrupting meetings and getting ejected, and they should be getting a fine or maybe getting suspended. You know, because I think they are finding out that they lack. This is good for them to switch the attention, and I think so. I would just want to add that particular item to Alvin's list of upcoming possible rule of law or erosion of the basic law, erosion of our electrical monitoring government power, sort of possible on their agenda. Okay. Your second question, gosh,
Uphill battle.
Uphill battle.
Strategy.
Yeah, strategy. What else other than elections and so on? Now, first of all, I do believe that we cannot give up on elections. A lot of people are saying that, hey, you guys lose anyway. You don't have enough people in there, and if you don't have enough people, you know, it doesn't make any difference. Well, imagine that no one is in there to fight. Then what will happen? And if you just like that, hey, you know, we're losing this election. Well, anyway, I do believe that it is important to maintain the political safe within the system, because like it or not, the media, the public look at that. If you give that up, you know, you're not going to be able to get it back. So I think that it's first thing, you know, don't give up on that either. First, but in addition, I think we have to go back to basics, and don't necessarily expect that we can overturn the tide right away. I know a lot of times, especially for young people, it's going to be very difficult to accept. I mean, you're saying that, hey, you guys are so unsuccessful for trying to get democracy for 21 years, and you're losing the battle is even worse than 10 years ago. You know, so what? You know, sometimes, you know, these issues, I mean, sometimes I really think that in the end, Beijing will lose on their own. You know, they will face their own problems. And then when that time comes, do we have the people in Hong Kong to say that, hey, this is the time we should be rising up to make sure that we get the democracy and the autonomy that we deserve and was guaranteed. So I think in some ways we need to be patient as well and use the time to advocate from the grassroots, from the basics. People see that there are unfairness, like this gentleman referred to about racial issues, and could be others. There are many others unfair issues in Hong Kong. You know, don't ignore them. Sometimes Chinese people are like that. They say you politicize issues. You know, this is not a political issue. You people are politicizing it. Okay, fine. I mean, just look at it in a non-political way. You think it's right? You think what's happening with MTR? You think what's happening with wealth distribution? You think that is right? I mean, I'm not trying to. Don't even bring in the politics part of it. And it's only that I think we have to patiently try to advocate to a larger group of citizens to get their support. That's very important. And I think that kind of groundwork, maybe really people look at things too politicized in some ways in the last several years, and then they're turned off by it. So how do we slowly but gradually, I don't want to say slowly, but at least gradually, try to win back that kind of support?
Charles spoke my mind, but how are we going to win them over? I think that is the key. Them, namely those who have abandoned politics, turn a blind eye to current affairs because they are too tired, too sick of what's happening. How are we going to win over those in the conservative camp? There must be people who share some values with us in the other camp. It might not be the highly political issues, the most controversial issues, but when it comes to, say, environmental issues, animal rights, I'm sure there must be something in common. And there should be something that we can work out to speak to them, to have a dialogue with them in order to win their hearts so that we can have a chance in the next election. I still believe that if we could capture 30 seats out of 70 in the last election, there's always a chance that we could get 32, 33, or even half of it in the next election. Of course, it's not easy, but we have to lay foundations. We are not asking for the moon, and we are not asking to get it right away. But then it takes time, especially when the other side is getting so sophisticated, when they are getting so much resources, when they have the time, when they have the people. They are so eager to win. They play our game. 4 years ago, 8 years ago, we were ahead. We were playing, we were so good on Facebook, we were so good on all this social media and message getting across. But nowadays, they have all the resources, they have the tools, they know how to play it. So we have to understand that we can't take things for granted. So that's what I think. Yeah.
The last question,
Okay.
this young gentleman.
And actually, I have two questions. The first one is for Mr. Mo, and it has to do with the rising Chinese IT sector and its impact on Hong Kong. So far recently, the HKSAR government and Beijing are cooking up this idea of Greater Bay Area, in which Hong Kong functions as the hub for the technological and scientific innovation. And part of this plan was to import more intellectuals and experts of this field to Hong Kong, from the mainland to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Innovation and Technology Commission are already having this technology talent admission scheme, which seeks to attract more IT people from the mainland by providing them with a fast track arrangement, which enables them to get the right of vote more conveniently. So my question is that, do you think this trend, the policy, will possibly affect the political ecology of the IT sector? Do you think that it will change the composition of the electorate in your IT functional constituency? And if so, how to respond to that in your next campaign for 2020?
First of all, don't assume that I will run again.
Okay.
But anyway, I think I look at it as an issue for Hong Kong and an issue for, let's say, even the technology industry, and not particularly about my future election or not. Okay. The biggest problem with you talked about, maybe influencing the functional constituency, my constituencies makeup in future, and changing the makeup and how it affects me. That's the last thing I worry about. The big thing is this particular system of functional constituency is wrong. I oppose it. And secondly, even for IT itself, is so full of ways that it could be easily manipulated in the current way of arrangement for the IT functional constituency. But I don't want to go into a lot of the technical details. But to say it simply, like the lawyers, they all are either the members of the bar or the members of the law society as solicitors. So you can't fake somebody to become a lawyer and I become a voter in the legal constituency. I cannot. But relatively, it's actually really a lot easier to do that in IT because we are a very broad and fast-changing field. That's enough for me to say about that. Back to the issue about Greater Bay Area and the import of talents and so on. Really, Alvin and I, in the last couple of days, actually, we met with quite a few Hong Kong people and entrepreneurs, startup guys in Silicon Valley from Hong Kong. And some of them still have a connection in Hong Kong, maybe a small office that they operate in Hong Kong for their startup. And they are telling us all these problems about the scheme of talent import scheme like a few years ago or within the last several years when they were trying to apply to get talent from overseas or even including from the mainland. They have all these questions that were unreasonable questions and unreasonably long bureaucracy, red tapes that were imposed on their application from our immigration department. I think the reality is they are facing a lot of challenge in getting the right people And stepping back, stepping one step backward, I do have to say that, you know, when I talk to IT companies in Hong Kong, what is the biggest problem that you are facing? 9 out of 10, or maybe even 10 out of 10 would tell me that they can't hire the right people. And I don't think that is unusual only for Hong Kong, especially after we went to including when we were meeting people here, and we went to also the Greater Bay Area, and I'm sure when we go to Britain, they will say the same thing. We don't have enough IT people. We don't have enough experts. We don't have technology people. We don't have enough data scientists. We don't have enough of this and that. So I think for Hong Kong, we can't just simply close our door and say that we cannot accept anybody to come in. But you pointed out a very important point. Is the Chinese government trying to use this as a reason or excuse or a way to dilute the Hong Kong population? Well, I really don't think that there is a grand scheme from Beijing trying to take away my seat and then they do this just for the IT functional constituency. But as a big scheme of things, you know, I do believe that China is it's not targeting me, of course, but it's targeting the whole Hong Kong. They do want to, you know, bring in more of these mainland people into Hong Kong.
One-way certificate?
Sorry?
One-way certificate.
One-way certificate.
One-way permit.
Well, one-way permit. Okay, maybe you can further comment on the one-way permit, but let me finish about the tax stuff first. But I think 2 points. Number one, I'm not against mainland Chinese people coming into Hong Kong, including the tech people. I know some of them, they're great. And I think in some ways we have to have some confidence about the system in Hong Kong. You know, I do know a lot of mainland friends who either came to Hong Kong to study or work, and they realize the advantage and the goodness of the system in Hong Kong. Not that they become anti-China, they don't have to do that, but at least they understand what's good about Hong Kong. And they will become, I have no problem with them becoming a good Hong Kong citizen after that, okay? So in a way, I don't really care. I think we have to have some confidence in Hong Kong. But the real problem actually is not just in, I think, import of these talents. Now, we have to make the system fair, okay? That is important. But because it does impact our local IT practitioners. And I'll stop at that. But yes, the point about the one-way visa, a one-way entry permit that Hong Kong have no jurisdiction or no control over, that is a problem, and that I'll pass it to Alvin.
I've been working on that, and I'm currently doing some research in trying to change the law. But of course, it takes some time because the law is quite. It's really the right of the Chinese government to grant visa or grant the permit to any applicants to go to Hong Kong, and that is for the purpose of family unification. So basically, to those who are not familiar with this issue, is there's a policy from China to grant 150 permits to Chinese citizens to become Hong Kong citizens on daily basis. So 150 times 365 times 21, you can find out how many people there are. And it's a highly significant number of population. And matter of fact is totally controlled by the Chinese authorities, but not the Hong Kong immigration department. So basically we have no say, which of this 150 can come to Hong Kong. And I'm thinking if I'm not going to trouble the Chinese authorities because there's no way I can change their law. But if they have one floodgate, why can't we set up another floodgate so that we could have a cross-check of their application? That is the line of thoughts I have. But
I just want to add one point to that. According to the, I and other legislators ask the government almost every year, or do every year, about the total number of these one-way permits that have been allowed since the handover 21 years ago. And the number right now almost or approximately around 1 million. So
just do the math.
It's not you do the math,
yeah.
and some of them actually okay, fine, really, some of them didn't stay in Hong Kong. They went back to China or someplace else. But the number is over or around 1 million right now. Now, the number aside, I also want to share with you that we did have exchange with Carrie Lam on this issue, even at the time when she was the chief secretary. Her answer was, according to the basic law, this is the sole responsibility or right of the Chinese government to decide who comes. We look at the basic law. I was trying to look at the basic law. I couldn't remember which article, but we debated with her that if you look at what's in the basic law, the wording is something like, and I'm not accurate on this, is something like the Chinese government in consultation, working with the Hong Kong government, would decide who comes. But it seems to us that it is the Hong Kong government who totally gave up the right that they legitimately has, because of whatever reason. I don't know, to protect corruption in China or whatever. But some people making a lot of money in it. It's a big deal, really. Some people still making a lot of money in it, I do believe. But so anyway, so that's also a background to what Alvin is talking about. How do we legally or otherwise, try to make some senses into it and get back the right that we actually are, in my view, that we hold originally, but the government give up on it.
I don't want to trample on your freedom of speech, but we were 112 minutes, exceeding the original 100 minutes, and the history department people want this room to be properly evacuated by 8 o'clock. And of course, they probably had almost nothing to eat since lunchtime. And that's why I never teach summer school. Summer school could be a torture, particularly evening session. And yes, 21 years ago when the dean asked me to do the course on Hong Kong 97, it was once a week for 3 hours, 7 to 10. And I don't think I would repeat the nightmare again. Before you go, remind yourself something is coming up next academic year. 2018 to 19 is the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Center for East Asian Studies. And in view of the very warm, enthusiastic attendance of the 4 rounds of Hong Kong event. Yes, I've been at Stanford since September 1970. For my 48 years, nothing was like this past academic year. This is the 4th and hopefully closing event of this academic on Hong Kong. And I was involved in all 4, unfortunately. So I feel like I worked summer school and all that, and would someone care to pay me OT? Anyway, but next year, with your warm support, we hope to find Stanford alum in Hong Kong a little bit endowment to set up an annual Hong Kong lecture.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know, because I'm open to suggestions, and we should not be restricted with a partisan preference. I would love to have the top man from Beijing to come here to shout at us or whatever. And of course,
we
I
shout at
would
them.
want other people from other walks of life, even youngsters from Hong Kong. Actually, the largest single lecture I had experienced in that was Joshua Wong's lecture. 93 people, not counting the press. And thank God the secretary asked me what kind of lunch. I said, well, buffet lunch. I said, well, round figure, 100. And there's not much left for me. So watch out, and hopefully sometime, may not be 4th quarter 2018, but hopefully January, February next year, we could manage to announce the annual Hong Kong lecture in celebration of the Center for Asian Studies half-century mark. And I hope you people respond, because this past year, the 4 Hong Kong events have been well subscribed, and actually we had to turn down several on the November 13th. Hong Kong Symposium last year, and I am very grateful for the charity of attention today, or rather tonight. This is a beautiful summer evening, and I would otherwise, not because of Hong Kong, spend it elsewhere. Okay, good night, and on behalf of the Center, on behalf of Hong Kong, I thank you.